Savannah still takes the bus, oh my God. That's adorable. Like something out of an old TV drama, except actually poor. Everyone burst out laughing. Champagne swayed in their glasses. I turned to look at my mother, but she didn't say a word. She just tightened her grip on her glass, avoiding my eyes. 6:03 p.m. I stepped out of a silver Uber with chipped paint. The wrought iron gates of my parents' mansion came into view, elaborate floral patterns curling in the metal, flanked by 2 perfectly trimmed rows of cypress leading up to the 3-story white stone home in North Grove, Vermont. I took a deep breath. My chest felt both heavy and strangely amused, as if even I wasn't sure I belonged here anymore. On either side of the driveway were rows of luxury cars, a blazing red Ferrari, a chrome-plated Bentley, and a brand-new Range Rover with temporary tags. But standing out the most was a bright blue Lamborghini parked deliberately askew, as if shouting in my face, "You're in the wrong place. Cousin." Chase Morgan. My cousin. The guy who always smirks, always wears tailored suits, and firmly believes a person's worth is measured by the watch on their wrist. I walked into the grand foyer. The familiar scent of peppermint essential oil floated in the chilled air. On the wall, the family portrait still hung high, but I was no longer the same person in that picture. My mother was the first to greet me. Her hair swept into a neat chignon. The navy silk gown hugging her figure made her look like she'd stepped off the cover of a magazine. "Sweetheart, you're still wearing that white blouse." Her eyes drifted down to my loafers. "What about the dress I sent from New York?" "I think this is fine." "Mom," I replied, forcing a small smile. "Comfortable?" She nodded, but that nod couldn't hide her disappointment. "Come on in. Uncle Richard is over there praising Chase for making junior partner." Of course, he was. In the sprawling living room glittering under chandelier light, people clustered around the bar. I heard the laughter before I even saw Chase. Well, Savannah, you came by. Uber." Chase raised his brows when he spotted me. How cute. Still using a bus pass, I thought people ditched those after middle school. Every eye immediately turned toward me. A beat of silence. Then the laughter broke out. Some covered their mouths. Some didn't bother. I tried to keep my composure, but my heart started pounding. My mother still said nothing. "What's that company again?" "You told us back then it was a data startup, right? Still running?" Chase tilted his head, feigning genuine curiosity. I gave a slight nod, not wanting to answer. "Strange, a CEO dressed so simply," he chuckled, sipping his drink. And right then, Chase paused. His gaze fell to my left wrist. The watch peeked out from under my sleeve. Silver metal, lightly scratched. A classic round face that would go unnoticed unless someone looked closely. A gift from Malcolm Raines, the mentor who had changed my life. Chase arched an eyebrow. "That? You get that at a flea market." I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could, my father, Douglas Morgan, seated across the room, set his glass down. Clink. The sound of glass on stone rang clearly through the laughter-filled room. He stood, walking toward me, his eyes fixed, as though he were seeing his youngest daughter for the very first time. "Savannah," he said, his voice low, "let me see that watch." The entire room went silent. Every laugh died instantly, and for the first time, I felt something strange drift through the air, a shift in the balance. The entire room fell silent when my father stared at my wrist. The silver watch. His eyes at that moment were no longer those of a father. They were the eyes of an investor who had just realized something that everyone else had overlooked. "Savannah, Do you know what this watch really is?" His voice was deep, almost choking. All eyes were still on me. Even Chase, the one who had mocked me just minutes earlier, was standing there with his mouth hanging open. I nodded slightly. "It's an original piece made by Malcolm Raines himself. I don't wear it for its value, but because—" My voice caught. "Because it's the only thing he left me." My mother tightened her grip on her wine glass. Uncle Richard stopped reaching for food. Madison stopped scrolling through her phone, and I was standing under the warm, golden light, back straight, hand resting gently on my left wrist. I felt as though I had just stepped out from the shadow they had always cast over me, just for a few seconds. But the price was 2 years of silence. That night, after leaving the dinner, I returned to my small apartment in the East Pine neighborhood. The apartment was barely over 400 square feet. One exposed brick wall, a desk pushed up against the window. I took off my shoes, shrugged off my coat, and collapsed onto the floor. The streetlights spilled into the room. The watch was still on my wrist. I covered my face with my hands. Silence. No one to tell. No one is waiting for me to come home. No one to ask me, "Are you okay?" I missed Malcolm. I missed the way he looked at me, not through my degrees, or my clothes, or the Morgan name, but with the eyes of someone who truly believed I could do something. I remembered the way he set the wooden box down on the table on my 27th birthday. "Malcolm, I can't accept this." "You're not accepting it because you're afraid. But remember, those who know where they're going don't need to shout in a crowd." And I had lived exactly that way. Quiet. Persistent. Building Raines applied systems from that cramped room, from coding sessions until 3 in the morning, from those first contracts worth only $1,000. I had never needed anyone's recognition. But tonight, when they laughed out loud, when my mother stayed silent, when they looked at me like I was someone to pity, I realized something painful. Sometimes, people don't hate you because you failed. They hate you because you dare to be different from them. The next morning, I started the day like any other, still walking to the bus stop, still carrying my laptop in my backpack, still wearing the old coat Malcolm once called simple yet refined. But inside, something had changed. I began thinking a lot about the next time, about the next occasion when they would mock me again, judge me again. Should I keep staying silent? Or, this time, would it be different if you've ever felt looked down on, just because you live differently, think differently, choose differently? Leave a comment below. I believe my story is also the story of many others. Subscribe to Revenge Mark so you don't miss the next part when silence begins to turn into action. I couldn't remember how long I had been sitting in that dark apartment that night. At one point, I thought about taking off Malcolm's watch and putting it back in its box, just so I wouldn't have to see his gaze in my mind every time I thought about standing there, surrounded by people laughing at me for taking an Uber. But I didn't do it. I couldn't. The next morning, I still went to work. Raines Applied Systems' small office was on the 4th floor of an old brick building in the Flatiron District. No signboard, no receptionist, just me, 2 engineers, 1 assistant/coordinator, and piles of deadlines. I was always the first one there, always at the same desk by the window, but today, I couldn't focus. I just kept staring at the stream of emails popping up on my screen without reading a single word. In my head, Chase's voice played again. "That watch, did you get it at a flea market?" I clenched my fist. Then my mother's voice, soft but cutting. You should have worn the dress I sent you." Then my father's eyes were surprised, a little proud. But why only after he realized that the watch was a rare collectible? That afternoon, I met Alyssa, my best friend from college. She was a marketing director at a big tech company and one of the few people who knew my entire journey of starting a business. We sat at our usual cafe. I ordered a matcha latte. She got an espresso. I told her about the party, condensed into 15 minutes. But inside, I felt like my chest had been gripped for hours. Alyssa frowned. "You must be used to that by now, right? That's just who they are." I thought, this time would be different. "Why would you think that?" She gave a small laugh. "You know what they think. Best to just forget it. Ignore it. Forget it." Those 2 words echoed in my head like a slap. Forget that they judged me simply because I live simply. Forget that they never ask how I feel, only what I'm wearing, what I'm driving, and how much I'm making. Or forget that my mother, the same woman who used to hold my hand before every nerve-wracking college presentation, stood silent while her daughter was humiliated in front of the entire family that night. I came home late. I didn't turn on the lights. I sat alone on the kitchen floor, leaning against the fridge. The watch on my wrist is still ticking, each second hand moving as softly as the breath of the past. And I remembered Malcolm's eyes the last time I saw him, when he said, "Silence can be strength, but sometimes it's complicity." Ma, I had never thought of myself as someone who would seek revenge. I just wanted to prove something, just once. That success isn't about an Armani suit or a silver Bentley, that you don't have to shout across a dinner table to change an entire market, that the very thing they looked down on is the thing reshaping the entire data technology industry, and I would make them see it, not through the press, not through showing off, but through the very truth they once mocked. Success doesn't need to be flashy. It just needs the right moment. If they only remember you as the girl who takes the bus, then let the day they learn the truth be something they never forget. Since that night, I have been sitting alone on the kitchen floor, and something inside me has begun to move. Not a burst of impulsive anger, not an outpouring of raw hurt, but something cold, clear, precise like a blueprint that had been drawn in my mind long ago, just waiting for the day it would be built. I didn't change my appearance. Still the same white button-up shirt, still the same worn loafers, still walking to the office at 7:25 mem, coffee cup worth $3 in hand. But inside, I was quietly shedding my skin. I began reviewing every single company document, balance sheets, current contracts, investment pipelines, product roadmaps. I was no longer just the founder. I became the coordinator, the guide, the one who would bring Rain's applied systems into the light. But in my own way, I hired 2 core team members, a former executive who had once run major projects for IBM, and a young tech lawyer, smart, quick-witted, and unafraid to argue her point. We met every Friday evening, not under bright lights, not in front of glossy whiteboards, just laptops, cold pizza, and a quiet belief that we were about to do something big. I started with the simplest thing, core value. Rain's Applied Systems doesn't sell a product. We provide a competitive edge. A tool for small businesses to optimize operations through data, something that used to be exclusive to large corporations. I decided to change our communication strategy. No more hiding entirely, but no showboating either. I began showing up at professional talks, only the ones that mattered. No flashy events, no meaningless interviews. In every speech, I began with a story. My company started from an IKEA desk, a sandwich, and a rejection email. The whole room would laugh. But after that, they listened. Because I wasn't telling it to impress. I was telling it to say, if I could do it, so can you. But deep down, there was still a fear. The fear that, if this plan failed, I would become exactly what they had always thought, a dreamy, stubborn, unrealistic girl living in ideals. The fear that there would be no second chance. Every time I sent out a pitch deck to investors, I lost sleep. Every time the team asked, "What if we can't raise the funds?" my heart skipped a beat. But then, I thought of Malcolm, of the look in his eyes when I first shared my idea, when there was nothing yet except belief. Success doesn't come from doing everything right. It comes from not stopping when others think you should. 2 weeks later, I received an email response from the Office of Technology under the Federal Department of Commerce. We had made the shortlist to pilot our platform for a cross-sector data management program, contract value nearly $6 million. I sat still in front of the screen, not because of the money, but because, for the first time, I felt truly seen not by my family, but by the very system that had once ignored people like me. I closed the laptop, looked at the watch on my wrist. The moment was drawing near, and this time, I would not bow my head. I didn't need to slap anyone in the face. I just needed them to hear their own words again, and then face them in silence. 1 month after that family dinner, I was invited to be the keynote speaker at the Data for the People conference, a gathering of hundreds of small businesses from across the Northeast. That morning, I stood backstage in a simple black shirt, Malcolm's watch still resting securely on my wrist. I wasn't nervous, because this was no longer about me. This was about the people without a voice. The ones drowned out by massive advertising budgets and flashy dashboards full of data they couldn't possibly understand. I began my talk with one simple sentence. They call us a young company, just a bunch of tech enthusiasts who refuse to grow up. But it's companies like ours that have kept over 1,000 small businesses from shutting down in the past 3 months. A small round of applause broke out. Then it spread. Then it exploded. 3 days later, a video of my speech was shared by an editor at Tech Foundry Weekly, a site dedicated to startups and innovative solutions. The headline read, "Savannah Morgan, CEO of a data company recently piloted by the government, reveals a quietly effective operating philosophy." No picture, no clickbait. But the article spread quietly. Within 2 days, traffic to our company website had tripled. We received collaboration offers from 3 major retail chains, 2 nonprofit organizations, and 1 community bank. And then, the unexpected happened. Saturday night, I got a text from Dad. "Savannah, Uncle Richard just called. He asked if you might be free to have dinner with Blake next week." I stared at the screen. I had never been invited to a one-on-one dinner with Blake. The reason just last week? Blake's law firm filed paperwork to implement internal data technology, which is exactly the kind of system Rains Applied Systems was providing, with the highest level of security in the market. I understood immediately. They hadn't realized what I had built until they saw the name Rains Applied Systems in a federal contract document, and then the dots connected. Slowly, but surely, I didn't turn down the invitation. We met at an Italian restaurant in the heart of downtown. Blake was still polished, still polite, still carrying himself as if he didn't remember mocking me for still taking the bus. We talked about technology, about the market. Then he asked, "So, where did you actually start back then? I thought you were just doing it for fun." I looked him straight in the eye. "You know, I used to think staying quiet was the best way to survive in this family, but maybe I was wrong. Sometimes Saying it out loud is the only thing that matters. Blake nodded. No argument. No defense. Just a nod. That seemed hard for him to swallow. That night, I went back to my apartment, opened the window. The night air was cool. I didn't smile. I just closed my eyes, and I felt like I had shifted something. Just a small ripple, but enough to cause a tremor in the world they thought they controlled. If you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever let them define you by the way you live, dress, or stay silent, then maybe you know exactly how this feels. Don't miss the next chapter. Subscribe to Revenge Mark and follow me until the day silence turns into undeniable truth. A rumor may not kill anyone, but if it comes at the right time, whispered in the right place, it can shake an entire career. 2 weeks after my meeting with Blake, I started to feel something wasn't right. It began with a cold email from the Federal Trade Commission. We are temporarily postponing the implementation of the next phase of the trial contract due to the need to review security recommendations related to internal data reflected in a recent anonymous report. Anonymous report, I read it over and over. Every word pressed heavier against my chest. I immediately called Jennifer, our in-house attorney. What exactly are they implying? I asked, my voice dry. Jennifer was silent for a few seconds before answering. There's a rumor that our system uses algorithms to extract metadata from a third party, and it's unclear whether we obtained permission for it. I froze. No way. We have never done that. My engineering team wrote every line of code with their own sweat. Malcolm used to say, if you want to play big, you have to start clean from day one. And I've kept that promise. A few days later, I got a call from an old friend who works at Industry Tech magazine. Savannah, you should know. There's an article in the works about a company allegedly cheating the analytics model by exploiting information from a competitor's platform. I gripped the phone tightly. Which company? She sighed. No specific name, but the description exactly matches Rain's applied systemy. I sat frozen for hours in my office. The article hadn't been published yet, but the rumor had already spread. One of our newly signed partners had politely withdrawn from the collaboration due to internal reasons. A potential investor suggested we pause negotiations to observe the market. My team was shaken. In their eyes, I saw my own fear reflected back. Everything could collapse because of a single whisper. That night, I drove to Vermont. I hadn't planned to call ahead, but I needed to see my father. He opened the door, looking a little surprised to see me standing there in a gray coat and dust-covered shoes. Savannah, is something wrong? I looked straight into his eyes. Dad, do you know if Blake has anything to do with the recent rumors? He paused. A single blink. Then he stepped back inside, inviting me in. We sat in his study, walls lined with still-life paintings and that familiar scent of old wood. I can't confirm anything, he said slowly. But maybe you've gone further than some in the family feel comfortable with. What do you mean by that? He didn't answer directly. He simply placed his hand on a folder on his desk. I saw the title printed at the corner of the cover, Private Sector Data Security Influence Report, compiled by Westbridge Group. Westbridge, the parent company of the law firm where Blake is a partner. I left the house in silence. I didn't say another word. The wind bit at my face, but my heart was colder than the wind. For the first time in this journey, I understood one thing clearly. This was no longer just an in-house game. They were using real power, names, media, and connections to strangle the trust I had fought so hard to build. And me, I had only one weapon left. The truth. But would that be enough to fight back? They thought I would stay silent. They thought I would just keep my head down and work, like I had for so many years. But this time, they forgot one thing I've learned how to strike back. The rumors were still simmering. The article hadn't been published yet, but the effects had already spread. In just 10 days, we lost 2 potential clients, 3 partnership opportunities, and 1 strategic advisor decided to step back for a while to reassess the market. I didn't blame them. If I were in their position, I would have done the same. But I didn't have the luxury of feeling sad. I had to fight back. That night, I called an emergency video meeting, looking into the faces of every team member. I didn't feel fear. I felt anger. A clear, rational kind of anger. The kind with plenty of reasons. They're going after our credibility, I said calmly. So we're going to respond with something they can't destroy with rumors data. I asked Isaac, our lead engineer, to extract the full audit trail from our system. Every line of code, every update, and every data access protocol is cited and verified. We compiled it into a white paper, a public technical report on how Rain's Applied Systems operates its platform. No PR spin, no flashy headlines, just the truth. And I sent it to the right person. 2 days later, Tech Ethics Weekly, one of the most independent and respected outlets in the industry, published an analysis titled, "They Say This Company Isn't Transparent." We read their code, and here's what we found. The article broke down our security architecture, proving our system did not harvest metadata as the rumors claimed. They called our product a step toward democratizing data technology for small businesses. Within 24 hours, the article had been shared over 5,000 times. Someone who had unfollowed me on LinkedIn sent me a connection request again. A representative from the Federal Trade Commission called me at 9:12 a.m. on Tuesday. "We'd like to meet with you again, Savannah. It seems we may have been caught up in a toxic wind." I didn't say anything. I just nodded. The meeting took place 3 days later. I presented our entire technical model again, walking them through the white paper. No apologies, no pleading, just evidence. By the end, the representative shook my hand and said, "Thank you for not giving up." I smiled. I never started to give up. That afternoon, Jennifer, our in-house counsel, walked into my office with a strange look on her face. "You should see this." She placed on my desk a printed copy of an internal email leak from Westbridge Group. The subject line read, "Post not effective, need to find a second approach." I looked at the sender's name. I wasn't surprised. Richard's executive assistant, and the person CC'd on the email was Blake. I sat still. My hand rested lightly on the desk. No outburst of rage, no shouting, just the sharp certainty you feel when you know you've spotted your enemy's Achilles heel. They thought I would crumble under the pressure, but that very pressure had exposed their weakness. That night, I got a call from someone I never expected, my mother. "Savannah, I heard your company got mentioned in some magazine or something." I didn't respond right away. I just listened to her voice, soft and hesitant. Then I simply said, "Yes." But that's not as important as the fact that I'm not staying silent anymore. On the other end, my mother was silent, just like my entire family had been these past years, just like Blake. Before everything started turning against him, they used to say, "No one cares about the girl in the white shirt riding the bus." Now, things are different. The question is, what will they do next sometimes? An enemy won't strike at where we're the strongest. They strike where we least expect it, because they know if we lose that, the pain will be 10 times worse. I thought my counterattack had ended the game. I thought exposing the evidence, clarifying the truth, pulling back the curtain on the schemes behind it all would be enough. I was wrong. Terribly wrong. 5 days after the post from Tech Ethics Weekly, just when public opinion was starting to lean in my favor, I got a call from Future Equity, one of Rain's Applied Systems' closest nonprofit partners. Their tone had turned noticeably cold. "We are undergoing an independent audit and have been instructed to temporarily suspend any technology collaborations related to the Data Bridge for Communities project." That project was the nonprofit initiative I cared about the most. It was where my platform was helping nearly 1,000 community organizations in small towns automate their financial management and reporting processes. I choked up. "Who instructed you to do that?" "Our direct auditing body." They received an anonymous tip alleging there is a conflict of interest, a financial conflict between the operating party and the founder. I let go of the phone. I knew right then this blow came from inside. That night, I went back to the office alone. The room was dark. Everyone had gone home. I sat down in my chair. Streetlight streamed through the window, casting my shadow long across the raw concrete floor. I thought about every minute I had poured into that project. About that first night I met the district leaders in a small town in Wisconsin. About the local women learning how to use data to distribute aid fairly. And now, because of an anonymous accusation, everything could be frozen. I didn't cry. I had no tears left. But my hands trembled. The next day, I called my lawyer. Jennifer listened, then fell silent for a long moment. "We need a thorough investigation. But if they're really setting a trap using your personal finances as bait, you have to be extremely careful. They're not attacking your company. They're attacking you." I understood. Because 3 days later, Blake called. Not by email. Not through a third party. He called directly. His voice sounded almost regretful. "Savannah, I heard about the thing with Future Equity. I heard. It's a mess." I didn't answer. I stayed silent. Blake hesitated. "I never meant to hurt you, but when you play big, people don't just sit still. The more you win, the more some see you as a threat." I gave a short, dry laugh. "And among those people, is that you?" He sighed. "I just do the job I'm assigned. But if you're smart, you'll know where to stop. The charity project is just one part. You've got other things worth keeping." I stopped laughing. A chill ran down my spine. Blake wasn't attacking me through the press anymore. He didn't need articles or rumors. He aimed straight at my weakest point, the place where I'd put my heart. The community project, the nonprofit, the trust. A place I never imagined could one day be taken hostage. I sat alone in my apartment. On the table was the watch Malcolm had given me, still ticking, still quiet. I remembered what he once told me. A real enemy won't attack your company. They'll attack the thing that makes you believe you're doing the right thing. I looked out the window. Night had fallen over the city. I knew. Next time, it wouldn't just be the project that got shut down. It could be me. The question was, how much more would I let them take? There are failures that don't make the sound of breaking. They sink. Very deep. Like when a person realizes they no longer know whether they're fighting for what's right or just because they're too afraid to lose. I used to think I was familiar with being looked down on, familiar with judgmental looks, familiar with snide remarks hidden in polite small talk, familiar even with the silence of loved ones when I needed just one word of defense. But I had never gotten used to the feeling that I was the one causing the hurt. When the news about the internal investigation spread, some community organizations sent me emails. No blame, no hostility. Just lines like, "We hope this matter will be resolved soon. The staff here are very worried. The kids are learning coding from the program you support. They don't understand what's going on, and they're afraid it will be shut down." I read every word like someone was slowly cutting through layers inside my chest. No sharp pain, but bleeding out all the same. That Friday night, I went to the office, not to work, just to sit. My hand rested on the desk, the light casting my shadow long, as if it were crawling toward the door. Everything that had once been motivation had now turned into pressure. When I first started, I didn't think much. I just wanted to create a solution. Then I wanted to prove myself. Then I wanted to protect what I had built. Then I wanted to reclaim justice. Then I wanted to teach them a lesson. And now, I no longer knew exactly what I was fighting for. Was I trying to save the company or just fighting against the feeling of being abandoned when I was 12? When my mother didn't show up to my school performance? Was I protecting others or just trying to prove I was no longer the girl Blake once despised? The confusion was suffocating. I went home late, very late. I didn't turn on the lights. I didn't play music. I didn't take off my shoes. I lay down on the floor. I didn't cry. I just stayed still. 1 hour, 2 hours. I don't know how long it was until my phone vibrated softly. A message from Jennifer. "Sis, I know this isn't the time, but there's something you need to know." I froze. Turns out, while I was doubting myself, Blake was quietly persuading a group of investors to transfer shares in the platform through an intermediary company. A long-term move, not loud. But if successful, he would gain the right to intervene in strategy. He didn't just want to bring me down in the media. He wanted to take the very thing I had built with blood, with Malcolm's trust, with sleepless nights, and all the times I didn't dare take a break. I put the phone down, sat up. No more tears, just silence. I once thought I was strong. I once thought I was tough enough to withstand invisible cuts. But now, I felt I was cracking from the inside. I turned on my computer, scrolled past the list of former collaborators, scrolled past unread emails, scrolled past the paused IPO plan. I scrolled past the photo of Malcolm, which is still on my desktop. Then I stopped. A quote he once sent me appeared on the black screen. "Savannah, if the day ever comes when you no longer trust anyone, then at least trust in what you've done for others." I read it again. Once, then twice, then 3 times, until my hands stopped shaking, and I knew I wasn't finished. I had just hit rock bottom, and from rock bottom, a person can stand up again. When you've hit rock bottom, every sound becomes sharper, and sometimes just one voice reminding you that you still matter is enough to help you stand up. 3A. I still hadn't slept. The kitchen light was still on. The coffee had gone cold. My laptop screen was frozen on the quarterly market share report. Nothing remarkable. No reason to keep reading. I didn't know what I was even trying to do anymore. Hold on to the company, hold on to my reputation, or just hold on to whatever scraps of pride I had left. I lowered my head onto the table. Everything felt blurry. Everything felt like it was slipping through my fingers until my phone vibrated softly. Zoe. Her name lit up on the screen. The 17-year-old girl from my very first mentorship program. The one who once gave a presentation on using data to track food distribution in low-income neighborhoods. I answered without even thinking. "Savannah." "Zoe, what's going on?" I'm sorry for calling so late, but I need to ask you something. Can I send my proposal to the government research team? Even though the project's been suspended, I still want to keep going. I sat up straight. Zoe went on, her voice steady, not a trace of hesitation. I saw the news online. Someone said you were in trouble, but I don't believe it. You taught me how to check data sources. I did that with the rumor. It was vague, lacking any real evidence. I just wanted to say, I still believe in you. It felt like someone had just lit a lantern inside my chest. After we hung up, I opened the folder labeled Klein Foundation. The last file was titled Mentorship Cycle Evaluation Notes. I wrote it nearly a year ago after meeting Zoe for the first time. Perhaps the most important thing I can leave behind isn't a company. It's a system for passing down knowledge. A bridge that people like Zoe will keep building. I read each line again, and in that moment, I knew I couldn't stop. I couldn't let them bring me down. I couldn't let Zoe think that this world would swallow good people whole. The next morning, I went to the office. The whiteboard was still blank. Jackets were draped over chairs, and the faint smell of coffee lingered in the air. I gathered the team, not to announce a strategy, not to launch a counterattack just yet, only to say one thing. If anyone wants to leave, I understand. But if you stay, we're not just going to defend ourselves anymore. There were a few seconds of silence. Then Isaac nodded, then Jennifer, then Maya, the youngest coordinator, grinned. You really think we could stand seeing you lose sleep? I laughed. Really laughed. For the first time in weeks. I began restructuring the company, redistributing the budget, focusing on our 2 core product lines, forming a small legal team dedicated to keeping all paperwork fully transparent for auditors. I called Future Equity back, set up a meeting with their board of directors, not to justify myself, but to share the truth and commit to complete transparency. They agreed. No promises yet, but I could see. The door had cracked open. That night, I sat in my small apartment. The screen in front of me was blank. I typed only one sentence. I'm not coming back for revenge. I'm coming back to keep a promise. A promise to Malcolm, to Zoe, to myself, the person I was when I first laid the foundation stone for this company. If you've ever thought you were too late to start over, too weak to fight back, or too small to make a difference, remember this sometimes. Just one spark is enough to begin again. Subscribe to Revenge Mark to follow my journey as I do exactly that on my own terms. This plan didn't come from anger. It came from scars, and from a kind of silence called, I cannot afford to lose ever again. I spent an entire week just thinking. No speeches, no social media posts, no responses to the press. I did only one thing I observed. I observed how Blake operated behind West Bridge. I watched every step of how he placed his people, every so-called shareholder meeting in disguise, every phone call transferring voting rights. I pinned the names of every shell company, every legal advisor, and every quiet secondary name that appeared in those emails. I was no longer the 27-year-old Savannah Morgan who trembled while reading a pitch deck, trying to hide a coffee stain on my white blouse. I was someone who understood the rules of the game, and this time, I would play by the rules. But on my table, the counterattack plan began with a simple phone call. Isaac, are you ready to come back to the tech team for a month? He laughed over the phone. You say that as if I ever left. We began rebuilding the system architecture from the core, not to change the product, but to prepare for a major move bidding for the second phase of the federal data digitization contract. This time, no middlemen, no investors to filter through. I would bid directly. The company name at the top of the proposal is Rains Applied Systems. At the same time, Jennifer formed a special advisory team, a PR expert, a retired senior journalist, and a former official who had overseen government tech projects. I didn't need to create a scandal. I only needed to shine a light. Shine a light on the process Westbridge once used for lobbying. Shine on the records of a shell company sharing the same address as one of the front companies trying to buy out my shares. Shine on the leaked articles from before, all originating from a group of editors connected to an investment fund closely tied to Richard Morgan. No one was being slandered. I didn't have to say they were wrong. I only needed to let the coincidences speak for themselves. When all the pieces started to fall into place, I had a closed-door meeting with two major investors, Mr. Stein and Ms. Haruki. Both held small stakes, but carried significant influence on the board. I opened the meeting with one line, "I'm not here to ask for help. I'm here to inform you. If you still believe this company should be led by the person who built it from zero, then I need one thing from you. Wait 8 more days." I handed them the plan. No flowery language. No vague promises. Just 3 target goals, 5 action steps, and a financial summary showing cash flow returning to stable levels within 6 weeks. Ms. Haruki studied me for a long moment before softly saying, "You've come a long way since the day you stood in a basement wearing that plain white t-shirt, giving your presentation." I smiled slightly, and I've never forgotten that t-shirt. Friday night. I walked alone around the Flatiron district. The city was still loud, but inside me, everything was quiet. No more anger, no more panic. Just the steady sound of my heartbeat, like the watch I wore on my wrist from Malcolm. 8 days. I had 8 days to prepare for the final appearance. One last time, before everything came into the light. As for them, I'm not sure they know what I'm about to bring. There are battles that don't break out on the front lines. They happen in a blink, a sentence, and in the silence of someone who knows they're about to lose. That day was a Tuesday. I wore a black shirt, my hair tied neatly back, and no makeup. On my wrist, the old silver watch still sat there, like a reminder not to stray too far from where I began. The meeting was held in a luxurious conference hall on the 34th floor of the Westbridge building. It was a so-called strategic dialogue between investment representatives, executive leadership, and, unofficially, those competing for control of Rains Applied Systems. I didn't bring a lawyer. I didn't bring a PR team. I only brought 2 things: the truth and my calm. I arrived early. Blake was already there. Same expensive suit, silver gray tie, the same confident demeanor as always. He was standing with a group of people, laughing, chatting, and shaking hands. But when he saw me walk in, his expression changed. Not exactly startled, just a little more cautious. We stood across from each other at the tea counter. Neither of us spoke first until Blake tilted his head slightly. "You don't look tense at all." I gave a faint smile, my eyes never leaving his. "And you can't hide that you're waiting." Blake took a sip of tea, set the cup down. "I'm guessing you've prepared something, and you're trying to guess how much I know." The space between us grew heavier. I looked straight at him. "You know, there was a time I thought that if I threw everything I had into fighting someone like you, it would mean I was becoming you." Blake frowned slightly but stayed silent. I continued, "But then I realized I don't need to become anyone. I just need to let everyone see who's who." The meeting began at 9:00 I presented last. I didn't speak much. I simply laid out the documents, a cross-check of irregular activities among a cluster of shell companies linked to Westbridge. proxy contracts deliberately routed through intermediaries to consolidate shares, and authenticated emails from media teams tied to smear campaigns. I didn't need to name anyone. Everything spoke for itself. The room was so quiet I could hear the rustle of pages turning. When I finished, Blake didn't say a word. He just gripped the arm of his chair a little too tightly and leaned toward the person next to him, whispering, but his eyes could no longer avoid mine. By the end of the meeting, as people filed out, I stayed where I was, looking out through the 34th floor windows. The city was still moving. Down there, the streets had no idea that a fatal blow had just been delivered with words, with evidence, and with the integrity someone thought I had lost. One of the investors walked up to me. He didn't say anything, just placed his hand gently on my shoulder and left. I understood. Now it was just a matter of waiting for tomorrow, waiting for the reaction, waiting to see what the person who once called me invisible would do when the spotlight was aimed right at their face. In the end, it is not the one who speaks the loudest who wins. It is the one who has the courage to look straight at what they once feared the most and still remains standing. The next morning, I was invited to the investors' board office to clarify a few details. I knew that was just soft language for what it really meant, a direct confrontation with the one who had been exposed. And that person, of course, was Blake. When I walked into the room, he was already sitting there. No more half smiles, no more carefree demeanor like before, only a tired, guarded look. Beside him were 2 legal advisors, and I came alone. I did not need anyone to protect the truth. I have just one question, Blake began. His voice was rougher than usual. What do you want? I looked him straight in the eye. I want you to admit it. Admit what? That you never cared about this company, that you only wanted to win, even if it meant crushing anyone who ever believed in you. Blake let out a laugh, a forced, twisted laugh. You think you're any different. You want to win, too. You expose, you manipulate public opinion. You think you're noble. I tightened my fists. The difference is, I didn't start this. No, you just ended it a little too cleanly, and that's exactly why people like me hate people like you. The room went silent, and I could see, for the first time in Blake's eyes, there was no contempt. There was fear. Blake stood up. Fine. You win. But you should know, the price you'll pay won't be small. You think people are going to applaud you for taking me down. I stood up as well. No, I don't need applause. I just need the light. Another pause. Then Blake spoke through clenched teeth. Don't think they'll always be on your side. People like you quiet for years, then suddenly, something dangerous will make everyone wary. I tilted my head slightly. If they're wary of me because I dared to stand up, then I know even more that I need to keep going. The meeting ended without a written record. Everyone left, and I was the only one still standing there. I slowly walked toward the glass wall. The city below kept moving, indifferent and noisy, but inside me, for the first time, there was absolute stillness. Not because I was gloating, not because Blake had fallen, but because I had crossed the line between revenge and cost. I could have made every one of his wrongdoings public, sent Blake's career into free fall. I could have pushed him out of the industry forever. But I didn't. Not because I was weak, but because I didn't need to. I had regained the one thing he would never understand, inner freedom. I returned to my office. I watched each person working, chatting, writing code and analyzing data. No one knew I had just come back from a battlefield. But I knew. And Malcolm somewhere. If he still existed in some layer of space, he knew too. I opened the old wooden box in my desk drawer. The old watch was still there, its hands still ticking steadily. I whispered, I didn't choose revenge. I chose to keep going. But in my mind, the question still echoed, does forgiveness truly make you stronger, or is it just the way to keep living? When revenge isn't enough to fill the emptiness. Every victory leaves an echo, but some echoes are not applause. They are the silence after you realize you have just crossed into something you can never go back from. 3 days after the meeting, the investment board officially released a statement. All merger activities through intermediary companies would be canceled. Rain's Applied Systems would retain its original ownership structure. The frozen future equity project was reinstated, and Blake? He no longer appeared in any meeting that had my company's name on it. Some sources said he had taken an extended leave for health reasons. I neither confirmed nor denied, and I wasn't happy about it either. That afternoon, I left the office early. I sat alone in the corner cafe where I had once written the very first business plan for the company. In front of me was an iced coffee, half melted. Inside me was a feeling I could barely name, not satisfied, not pride, just empty. I thought I would feel relief. I thought that when every truth was out in the open, when I no longer had to hide behind defenses, I would feel at peace. But I didn't. Because in the process of holding on to what I believed in, I had lost a few things. I no longer carried the naivety I once had. I no longer believed that simply doing the right thing was enough. And most importantly, I began to doubt whether the road I was on, despite winning, was still the same road I had started on. That evening, my mother called for the first time in months. I read the news. Everything's okay now. Right. I stayed silent for a few seconds. Technically, yes. She hesitated. I'm sorry. If I wasn't on your side before. I didn't know what to say, because the apology came after everything. After all the times she stayed silent at family dinners. After the pity in her eyes when I chose to take the bus instead of driving. After I had to stand alone in a family that believed silence was how you kept the peace. But then I exhaled lightly. I don't need you to defend me, Mom. I just wish you had asked if I was okay. On the other end, she cried, a small, quiet sob. That night, I went back to my old apartment. Still, the small room has exposed brick walls. Still, the window looked out at the scattered city lights. I took off Malcolm's watch and set it on the table, and I realized I had never imagined that the day I won would feel this sad. I had won, but I had also changed. I was stronger, but I had also lost the gentleness Malcolm once said would keep you human among all the numbers. I don't regret fighting, but I understand now that any revenge, no matter how justified, will leave scars that justice alone can never soothe. The night wind slipped in. I looked out the window, and I wondered if someone out there was about to begin a journey like the one I once started. Would I tell them to stand up, or to take a step back to protect themselves? Revenge made me see. Forgiveness let me breathe again. But only when I walked away from myself did I truly become free. 3 weeks after the final meeting, I left the city. No press conference, no victory party, just me, booking a train ticket to a small town in Vermont. There, I rented a small wooden cabin far from the city, far from the clacking of keyboards, far from every power game I had once been swept into. On the first day, I slept for nearly 14 hours. On the second day, I simply walked around the forest. I didn't touch my phone. On the third day, I wrote a single line in my notebook. I am no longer the woman I was back then, but I am still the little girl who once believed that if she did the right thing, she would eventually get to where she needed to be. I did not turn my back on the past. I simply folded it away, like a letter I had read carefully, tucked into a drawer. I still remembered Blake, but I no longer felt anger. I still remembered my mother's eyes, but I no longer longed for her approval. I still carried Malcolm's watch, but now it was no longer a reminder that I had to be strong. It was a gentle whisper. You are allowed to live slowly. One light rainy afternoon, I sat on the wooden porch, made coffee, and opened my laptop to write. Not a company business plan, but the first chapter of a book. About data no, about justice. Not exactly. About a woman who had learned to believe that no one is truly invisible if they dare to tell their own story. And I had already told mine. Now it was time to keep living. A month later, I returned to New York. But I didn't return to the company. I handed the CEO position over to Maya, a younger, bolder woman who had enough fire to carry what I once built. I stayed on as a strategic advisor. No fame, no spotlight. I began teaching at community colleges, mentoring women who were starting from zero just as I once did. I no longer needed control. I just needed to pass it on. One afternoon, as I was leaving class, I received an email from Zoe. She had been invited to a major technology conference to give a presentation. The last line of her email read, I don't think I would have come this far if, back then, you hadn't told me that I had value even when I was just a girl who didn't know how to write a single line of code. I smiled, and I understood that was the real legacy, not the company, not the titles, but this having someone else continue to live out a piece of what you once believed in. I returned to my small apartment, still the same room, still the same old floor lamp, still Malcolm's watch ticking steadily. I was not as wealthy as people thought, not as powerful as people assumed, but I had lived, fully, and no longer hiding from myself. If you've ever been looked down on, ever been pushed away from your own family's table, ever had to hold yourself together so you wouldn't break down in front of someone who thought you were invisible, remember this. You don't need anyone's approval to be worthy. You just need to start saying, I'm still here. If my story has reached you, don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments below. Share it with someone who needs a reminder that they are not alone. And subscribe to Revenge Mark to hear more stories about strength beginning from the very place people once thought was your greatest weakness.